Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to learn to write the equation of ellipses in standard form given certain properties or information about it. But no matter what properties or information we get, we have to come up with the center HK, where it's obviously centered. That's why they call it the center, because that is part of our equation. It's the horizontal and the vertical shift of our ellipse. Then the next thing we need to also come up with is the length of our major and minor axis, specifically half the length, because half the length is our A value and half the length of the major axis is our A value and half the length of our minor axis is the B value. Now I notice that this one is centered at the origin, which tells us the center is 0, 0. And then it tells us that a vertex is at 0, 7, which is above the center 7 units, which tells me my major axis length is 14. But remember, I want half the major axis, which is just 7. That's going to be my A value. And I put it underneath the Y because it's vertical. It's up and down. It corresponds to the Y. My minor axis is going horizontal from -5 through the origin over to 5. And again, half the length of the minor axis is 5. So that's my B value. My B value is 5. My A value is 7. And now I can actually write the equation. It's just going to be x squared, because h is 0, all over 25, because that's half the minor axis squared, plus y squared, all over 49, because that's half the major axis squared, equals 1. And it's always equal to 1. So I'm going to type that in. Now that I've typed that in, we'll submit and see if we get it right. Awesome job. Now let's look at one that isn't centered at the origin. This one has a center of 0, 18. So this center right here is 0, 18. Then it says its vertex is -10, 18. 18 is the same y value, so that tells me it's to the left. So my b value is from a x value of 0 to an x value of -10. That's 10 units. Then I have a covertex at 0, 24, which is above 0, 18, above it by 6 units, which means I have the minor axis is 12 in length, or the b value is 6. Which now allows me to write the equation. Again, if you'll notice, the x value of my center is 0, so h is 0, so I have an x squared over, now remember, it's the horizontal that's the major, or this 10, and I square it, so it's x squared over 100 plus, and it's always plus if it's an ellipse, y minus 18, because what's the y value of the center? 18, in parentheses squared, all over my b value squared, which was 6 squared, or 36, and that equals 1. And the reason the 36 is under the y is because that's the covertice corresponds to up and down. The major axis corresponds to left and right. So the A, which is the longer one, is always underneath the major one, which is x. Here I go to submit that. X squared over 100 plus y minus 19, not 19, 18 squared. I almost made a mistake there. 18 in parentheses squared over 36 equals 1. Now let's look at one of the harder ones where they give us just the vertices, and both co-vertices. They don't give us the center, but we can easily find the center. The center is always going to be right in between both endpoints of the vertices and co-vertices. Now, if you'll notice that we have some square roots in here, but look for the commas. So my x value for my one vertice, because I'm looking at vertices, -2, the other x value is also -2. So what that tells me, oh yeah, what that tells me is that, What that tells me anyway is that I'm not left or right. The vertices are up and down. So the question is how far away is this y value from this y value? Well, if you'll notice, it's negative 10 minus the square root of 61 and negative 10 plus the square root of 61. It's up and down by the square root of 61. So obviously my y value for my center is negative 10. Just find them, add those two together and divide by 2 if you need to do it. And you'll find out that it ends up being negative 10. Now let's find the x value for my vertex, and I found that by the covertices, because if you notice in the covertices, the y is the same. So that means I'm not shifted right or left. I'm not shifted up or down. I'm shifted right and left for the covertices. And the x value for the one covertice is negative 9. The x value for the other covertice is 5. What's the midpoint in between those? Just add them together and divide by 2. We get an x value of negative 2. Because negative 9 plus 5 is 4. Square root of 4, not square root, half of 4 is 2. So that's the midpoint. That's the center. And again, I should have added off to the side negative 10 plus the square root of 61 added to negative 10 minus the square root of 61. Well, the square roots of 61 cancel. Negative 10 and negative 10 is negative 20. Divided by 2 is negative 10. I'm just finding the midpoint, averaging, adding up and divide by 2. Now that I have the center, I also need to know what the distance from the center to those vertices are. Well, that's easy because I know that I went from a negative 2 out to either a positive 5 or a negative 9. So that means I'm going a distance of 7 to my covertices. So my b value is 7, going from negative 2 to either 5 or 9. And then my a value, which is going from negative 10 out to the negative 10 square root plus the square root of 61, or negative 10 minus the square root of 61. Well, that means my a value is the square root of 61. That's what I added and subtracted from the center. Now that's going to make it nice and easy. I'm going to go x minus, what's my horizontal shift? 2. Since it's minus a minus 2, it's going to be x plus 2 squared all over. Now, since the covertices were left and right, this is going to be my b value squared, which is the square, or 7 squared, which is 49, plus y minus my y's value center, but it's a negative 10, and minus of minus 10 means it's plus 10, in parentheses squared. That's a 10, looks kind of like a 6, all over my a value squared. Well, what happens when you square a square root? It cancels, and we're left with 61, which is bigger than 49, so that makes sense, equals always 1. So I'm going to go type that in. Now that I've typed that in, let's see how I did. Fantastic. So hopefully this is enough to get you to be able to do these up to at least 90. Again, if they give you the vertices and the covertices, you can find the center, you can find the length of A and B. The ones that you're eventually going to get to is when they give you a foci. I haven't taught you about foci. If you want to know how to do the foci, I will teach you individually in class. Otherwise, I think getting up to a 90 is more than enough for you to move on to next math.